I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it was all started by a mouse.
Hello, everyone out there in podcast land. This is the Beyond the Mouse podcast for NPR Illinois Community Voices and also for the Front Row Network, where we talk all things Disney. And we have another special interview to bring you today. But before we do, let's introduce ourselves. My name is Craig, and I also have with me my co-host, Brett Rutherford.
Well, hello there.
And also my other co-host, Vanessa Ferguson.
Hi, Craig.
We just got done with this interview that we're going to present to you, and I've got to say, it's just a wonderful time to get to talk to this individual. She is so lovely and able to talk to us about her whole career and her really family's place in the Disney legacy, along with how she produces films that shine spotlights all over the world, not even just with the Disney company, but just throughout the entire world. So I'm going to give you a brief bio of Leslie Iwerks, and then we're going to get right into the interview. Leslie is a producer, director, and writer. She has directed films such as Recycled Life, which was nominated for an Oscar for Best Documentary Short Feature, and also an Emmy for The Pixar Story, which was nominated for an Emmy in the Best Nonfiction Special category. She's also directed documentaries such as The Hand Behind the Mouse, the Iwerks story. And if you have Disney Plus, you can see her work in the 6-episode Imagineering Story right now. She is the granddaughter of Iwerks, who was a co-creator of Mickey Mouse along with Walt Disney. And she's also daughter to Don Iwerks, who is a Disney legend in his own right. And she, again, had such a wonderful interview with us. Can't wait to get into it. Without further ado, here is Leslie Iwerks. Here we are with Beyond the Mouse and NPR Illinois, and we are talking today with Leslie Iwerks. We are so excited to have you join us. Thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I'm a big fan of NPR.
Absolutely. We're so glad to have that partnership with them. And we will be asking you some questions about your career and just finding out a little bit more about you. And we're very excited about that. And actually, Vanessa has our first question.
Yeah, so Leslie, we're all big Disney fans here, and we assume that, you could have chosen probably the Disney career of your dreams, but you went into filmmaking. So we wanted to ask, why filmmaking, and how did you get your start?
Well, I think filmmaking is sort of in my blood, having grown up behind the scenes of Disney and the theme parks and the back lot of Disney. And I sort of got that early taste of it as a kid, running around the back lot when my dad was working in the machine shop, designing cameras and projection systems and things. And maybe it was just through osmosis. Some of my first memories was walking around the back lot, some of the Western sets. That they were filming some Westerns on the back lot, and I just remember seeing the face, the facade that was real. Then you'd go in through the door, and it was all wood and just wood beams in there, and there was nothing inside. And I just got I had this memory of like what's real and what's fake, and then the same kind of with Disneyland of like what's in front of the house and then what's in back of the house. And that was always just intriguing to me of just how things get made and how things are done.
Absolutely. And so your first full-length documentary was about your grandfather and the Iwerks story. It's wonderful. I would definitely suggest that people go and check it out. But can you talk a bit about the process of making that, having that become a reality? And then also, did you get to learn a bit more about your family history through that process?
Yes. So my grandfather died when I was only 1 year old. And so I never had the privilege of getting to know him. And so as I grew up, I learned all these stories about him through my grandmother and my parents and all these old stories. And I'd visit my grandmother's house, and there were photos on the wall of he and Walt, and back in their early days in Kansas City. And it was always intriguing to me, but I never really knew enough about him. So I always thought there should be a film about him, some sort of story that really tells his side of things. And so by the time I went to USC Film School and graduated, I just thought if there's ever going to be a time for me to do one documentary in my life, it's going to be about him, just because I wanted to interview people that knew him and work with him. And so I did, and that gave me an amazing opportunity to get to know him through all the people that knew him firsthand before they passed away. And one of them was Chuck Jones, Warner Brothers director of cartoons, amazing director, and he got his start at the Iwerks Studios. And in fact, he used to say, people, when I got my first job as a cell washer, was a cell washer, and cleaning
Oh,
the cells
wow.
after,
Yes. Oh, wow.
yeah, after they were done photographing them, and people would say, "Are you working in a jail?" They thought he was working in a jail, not in
The
animation.
cell washer. Oh, no. Well,
Yeah.
yeah. No, 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 no.
So
Wow.
anyway, it was a fun experience, and very gratifying to complete it and have Roy Disney's support and get the distribution from the Disney company. And I think it really brought him back into the public spotlight.
Absolutely. Vanessa?
Well, you talked about this a little bit, about your dad, Disney legend, Don Iwerks. And so we're just wondering, can you tell us more about maybe being a kid, or what your dad, what his experience was like? I just have this idea in my head that, like, if my dad was an Imagineer, he'd be sneaking me in and I'd get to ride all the rides and like go on a Small World 100 times. And what was that like?
Well, my dad was an inventor and a technical guy, so he was always working in the machine shop. So, I was less running around the parks than I was like running or kind of seeing all the machines being built and all the, lenses being crafted. And he would come home and he would just, be working on whatever he was working on, not CAD machine, his CAD system, I should say, and laying out designs for camera systems and lenses. And I'd look over his shoulder and say, what are you doing? I had no idea. And he would explain it to me in great detail. He's very good at detail. And I would just kind of be like, okay, I have no idea what you're saying. But he's brilliant. He's a genius. He and my grandfather both. And I think he really he had a lifetime opportunity to work with my grandfather under his tutelage, and learned a lot about machining and a lot about technology and a lot about lenses and about optics and you name it. And he was a camera assistant on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and he just has always taken to lenses and photography, and I think all that, working under my grandfather and then ultimately overseeing the machine shop and being head of the machine shop, that was the sort of center for all these different technologies that were being developed across the company wide, the parks to the movies. That was kind of how I got into an interest, I suppose, in film and cameras and technology and things like that. And both the creativity and the technology. And one thing that John Lasseter said many years ago when they were forming Pixar was that art challenges technology and technology inspires art. And that was kind of their motto for Pixar. And, I just saw that all my life, really. Walt and Ub did that since they were young, 20-somethings in Kansas City, Missouri, doing the Alice in Cartoonland comedies with live action and animation.
Right. And I love that story too, where you, I think you took a fake hand and like used to scare people with it. I'm like, that's so great.
Yeah, the cartoon that Disney put out. So my dad's hand was his hand was the mold for Lincoln's animatronic hand when Lincoln came back to Disneyland.
Right.
And he needed the right size. And so it was actually the day that Walt died. He was getting his mold made, and he heard over the loudspeaker that Walt had just passed away.
Oh, wow.
So when he finished the mold, he went up to my grandfather's office, and my grandfather said, "That's the end of an era. We'll never see the likes of him again." You think about Walt and Ub they were the very first partners, animation partners in 1923. Actually earlier than that, like I think they met in 1919. So, to go all the way to 1966 when Walt died, that's a long time and a long history of the two of them together. So that was an interesting day and an interesting memento, I should say, that to have a rubber hand that we've had in our house all these years, and I used to take it to school and torture people with it. And hide it.
I love it.
So,
Fantastic. And you know, what's incredible, you mentioned your father working on 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. Just recently rewatched that movie. It's been, they've really digitized it and really brought it to looking so pristine on Disney Plus. I would highly recommend that people go out and watch that. But it's just incredible the amount of technology, even back in '54, the underwater photography that goes on in that film. Just amazing, the shots that they were able to get. And like you said, you come from such a creative family. And so we mentioned it in your biography, but it hasn't come up yet in this conversation. You're an Academy Award nominee. And so I know Vanessa wanted to talk about Recycled Life.
Yeah, well, when I was watching the film, you know, it's very different than Disney, what we think of like Imagineering Story, and I was just wondering, when you're filming, you know, in recycling a Recycled Life, and you see these people, especially children, living in these unsafe and unsanitary conditions, you know, how do you film that? Do you ever find yourself wanting to interfere with what they're doing for their own safety, or maybe even your own safety, watching, you know, these kids in this environment?
you know, I think it's a hard line to cross. For those that don't know the film Recycled Life, it was a film I did some time ago. I filmed it in Guatemala City, and we came upon this garbage dump that was the largest landfill in Central America. And it was a project that we didn't know we were ever going to do. It was just something that I saw, and I went, oh my God, we've got to tell the story. And so there were thousands of people living and working in this garbage dump. It looked like a Hieronymus Bosch painting. Garden of Earthly Delights, like kind of compared it to, you know, just so much going on, and just all this activity. And so we ended up filming there for on and off for years, for a number of years. But and then it ultimately got Oscar nominated. And but it was interesting because I always felt it was a powerful story, and there were people we got to get to know in here. They were people that recycled trash. They lived around the outskirts of the garbage dump in shanty towns and tin huts, basically. We did offer, you know, to give them help in various ways, but we didn't want to interfere with their lives in any way. And they treated us as equals, and we treated them as equals, and they knew that we were out for their best interest. And the money that we raised as a result of that film helped to build the schools down there, you know, through Safe Passage, which is a nonprofit founded by the late Hanley Denning. So we raised, you know, millions of dollars in her honor through the film and through donations because of the film. And so those are the things that really make it all worthwhile for me. It's fun to do films that are entertaining and inspiring, but there's also the ones that make a difference in humanity, and those are the types of films that I really love to make.
Now, when you actually received that call that it's been nominated for an Oscar, and then you also have been nominated for an Emmy for your work on Pixar Story, what is that experience like? Is it does it drive you even more once you get that level of recognition of your work, or is it something that is nice but not necessarily crucial to your creative process?
Right. So it was actually, now I remember the date, 2007. So around the same year, I got nominated for an Emmy for Pixar Story, and they both kind of were back to back, and it was really validating after a lot of hard work. Of course, you know, my grandfather and my father both have Oscars. We have 2 Oscars on our mantle, and of course, it's a lifelong goal for me to win my own and have a third up there. But that's not necessarily what drives me. What drives me is just making the most powerful films I can, and find the most interesting stories to tell, and know that there would be an audience for them. Not every film I've done has had a huge audience, and not every film has had the impact that I hoped it would. But there's a lot of films that make up for that too, you know. And it's, so to me, I kind of ride that fine line between the real fun ones, and then the ones that whatever money that I can put into the ones that I think are maybe a little more esoteric, but I just know I can just grab a camera and go shoot it with my cameraman. Those are the kinds of real, you know, that's the fun. when it's just grab and go and let's go find the story. We just did that in Macedonia 2 years ago and filmed the fake news cottage industry over there and the impact that these teenagers were having on the fake news industry in the U.S. And so that's a near and dear to my heart project that I'm hoping will have to see the light of day this coming fall before the election.
Yeah, I hope so too. I've been to Macedonia, and it's kind of off the radar, and so to see it popping up after our big election cycle, it was wild, and I'm so glad that you were able to go there and film that piece, because it was kind of bizarre.
Yeah, it's true. I don't meet many people that have been to Macedonia, so that's cool. And the issue now is there's fake news coronavirus troll farms there, and they are making another dent for people that don't know how to discern fake news from truth, and people that spread it on Facebook. And I think Facebook has a big player in this as well. And it's a big issue, and it's something that I am just continually to pursue outside of my other projects.
And you mentioned that you like to tell creative stories, and Brett mentioned that he took a pretty deep dive into your work this past weekend, and he wants to ask you a question about another one of your projects.
Well, yes. Well, I mean, this weekend, I had the opportunity to watch Ella Brennan commanding the table, which was so interesting, learning about the New Orleans food culture and her influence on food. I also learned how to say New Orleans. It's so many syllables, so that was good. So how did you learn about Ella, and how did you bring her story to everyone?
Well, it was through a mutual friend of Ella's, the Brennan family and me. It was Deb Shriver, who was the COO of Hearst Media Company, and I had done a project with Hearst before. And so she said, would you be interested in doing a film on Ella Brennan? And at the time, I wasn't aware of Ella Brennan. I had only been to New Orleans once, many, many years ago for a weekend. And so, but I've always loved the South and the stories that are in the South. And New Orleans is its own enclave. And so I dug deep into her life as quickly as I could before I traveled out there. And I actually met her for dinner at Commander's Palace, and we had a lovely dinner.
I
And
bet.
she was somebody I'll never forget, because she just asks you so many questions about yourself. She just wants to know everything about you. And, her level of hospitality and grace and charm was unlike very few people I've ever met. And I think if I can aspire to be more like her every day, I'll be a better person for it.
Wow.
She trained me, not trained me, she taught me just and through the making of the film, what true hospitality is, what giving is in a restaurant, what making a dining memory is. She created systems. What was interesting about Ella was, she was a woman in a man's world, started the Brennan restaurant chain after her brother Owen died. Not chain, but, Brennan's in New Orleans.
Empire.
They opened up other restaurants in other cities, but, she would always look at the business sections in newspapers and see how she could apply various stories in other industries to her own restaurant. Whether it be a sports story or a car industry story, or you name it, she would apply the principles of that business success and try to bring it into her own restaurant. And so she utilized those techniques with Paul Prudhomme, who came in as a Cajun chef, and it's where Creole and Cajun crash in the kitchen of Commander's Palace. And she, with Emeril Lagasse, really helped to shape him into the celebrity chef that he ultimately became, and just really helped to refine the food of New Orleans and put it on the map. She always wanted to be the Paris of the country, So the film was a lot of fun. It was on Netflix for like 3 years, and now it's on iTunes. And it's just a real fun, interesting biopic on a woman who made a big difference in the food industry, and isn't necessarily all that well known outside of this, the New Orleans area.
Well, I found it fascinating, and she was like taken under the wing of Helen McCauley, who was a food editor, And it was so interesting to hear her stories of going to New York and going to really wonderful restaurants. And she was hanging out with James Beard, who she called Jim, which like going, and Jacques Pepin and Julia Child. And you could tell that that was such a wonderful influence on her life and her experiences there. And it was kind of, she was just very humble, and it was a very much a learning experience. And so that was interesting. So thank you for bringing her story to all of us.
Well,
So
thank you for
I
watching.
enjoyed that.
And I'm actually writing a series, a narrative series now based on her life. So
Oh, how cool. So you brought her story to life. So we'll have to put links or something. We'll have to tell everyone about it, because as you said, it's available on iTunes. So, that's a good thing. So
yeah, Amazon and other streaming sites as well.
yeah,
So
I enjoyed it very much. So
thanks.
yeah, I was familiar with your work and before this, but I did, as I said, kind of this deep dive into all of your work, and I feel as though I'm ready to at least work on the Leslie Iwerks story. So with your blessings, no, just kidding. So just kidding. I enjoyed all of it. So thank you.
Well, if you they asked me to tell my story in the TEDx talk that I did in Torino, Italy. And that was kind of a backdrop of a little bit of how I got into documentaries and what inspired me and family backdrop and all that. So you can check that out too on TEDx.
We did. It's good. I mean, we've tried to do enough research that we were ready for you. So yeah.
Well, that's why NPR is as good as NPR is.
Yes.
And one of the things, of course, what we as Disney fans as well, it's really interesting going back to pre-launch of Disney Plus, because everyone was talking about The Mandalorian and it was going to be this great show, and Jon Favreau does such an amazing job with that. But I think that us Disney Parks fans in particular were so intrigued by the Imagineering story, and that it was going to be, the first episode was going to drop on November 12th. It was going to be available. And so it was just such an exciting time, and getting ready to be able to see that. And then to see this amazing story come out of these 6 episodes that just really told the real reason. I point that documentary series to, if you want to know why I love Disney, why I love the parks, why I love this brand, this company, this story tells that story. And it's such a cool way to be told. And so excited that we were able to see it. And just little things that you did, like for instance, in the title credits, that scene of the door, and it says absolutely no photography. You're opening the door to us and showing us Imagineering really for the first time, and giving a lot of those people that have built this company their credit and their due. So we're going to get into Imagineering Story a bit, and I just wanted to know off the top, was there a particular interview that you were really excited about, or that you really felt was able to grab the passion that comes into Disney Imagineering? Did you have a favorite, or is it kind of like children, you can't really have a favorite?
It's tricky. It's a hard one, because we interviewed over 200 people for this show, all around every park around the world. And we went behind the scenes, we went in the parks, we spent a lot of time at Imagineering in Glendale. And we also interviewed people that didn't make the film, that were third parties talking about Imagineering, and ultimately decided to keep it really insular, keep it from the inside out, not at people looking at it from outside in. And, I would say that we did it in layers. We started with kind of the original legendary Imagineers, and I had already known a lot of them already through my family and backdrop and background and whatnot. So I knew, Bob Gurr, and had met Rolly Crump before, knew Alice Davis. So of course those original legendary Imagineers who were family friends, of course, I loved spending time with them and just hearing their stories and having the ability and the reason to really deep dive into their background. But in addition, I really got a different perspective by interviewing Michael Eisner and also Bob Iger. about their history, because you're seeing it from the artist standpoint and what they went through, and the folks that knew Walt and how they got guided by Walt and all those challenges of building Disneyland. But then when you talk to Michael Eisner and Bob Iger, they're coming from it from the top down, and you're seeing a totally different perspective of what it's like to run an entire company, and how they felt they directed Imagineering and the shape and the direction of the parks during their tenure. And so that was fascinating to me, to really get their story from a business standpoint. And you don't always get that access, right? So it was truly a great conversation. I mean, the conversations went long. You know, neither one of them really seemed like they wanted to end the interview. So that was a lot of fun. And again, it's that blending of technology and business. And I love the business stories. I gravitate towards great, strong, interesting business stories. And then I love the creative, and I love the creative process, and the story of artists. And having documented a number of artists and technologists in my films, from Industrial Light and Magic to Pixar to Hand Behind the Mouse, and even the Hearst Company, you know, I've kind of gotten a feel of what it feels like to be creative within certain business confines or economic confines, and how to kind of tell those stories that are the challenges of the creative spirit. So, so those are a few people I really enjoyed speaking with. But I enjoyed speaking with everybody, because everybody had a great story. And I spent, number of trips to Shanghai Disneyland, tromping around the dirt and the mud and boots and hard hat with the various Imagineers who were so kind to give me, bits of their time in between major deadlines and pressures. So the adventure was great. The adventure was really on and off for 7 years, filming and editing. We never knew it was going to be a multi-part series. We thought it was going to be a 90-minute film, but by year 4, we had so much footage that I went back to Disney and said, would you consider a series? So that's kind of how it evolved. We already had 6 hours cut at that point, so it would have been a lot harder to go back.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that would be the editor's cut. That would be you would have an audience. So
really glad they allowed you to make it into a series. And what's interesting about it too is that you really get some of that raw. You get to see the fits and starts of the parks and Imagineering, and you get not only the cheery accomplishments that the parks have had, but also some of the setbacks that they've had. And it's just a really, truly marvelous look at the parks. And I know, Vanessa, you have a question about Bob Gurr.
Yeah, well, we got to speak to Bob Gurr the other day, and he's a hoot. We love him. But he was talking about the Imagineering Story, and he really was just so impressed with the film and with you. And I think he was really glad to see his basketball shot successfully documented, because he said it's the only time he's ever made a hoop. And that was such a great moment, and him signing the wall was it really touched us as the audience, seeing that. I wondered, was there anything that you weren't able to capture that you wanted to, or maybe was there something that hit the editing floor, as they say, that didn't make it into the documentary that you may have wanted to be seen?
Well, if I might reverse that, I would say that basketball scene was something that was very spontaneous. And I had known that I wanted to take the audience into places that they would never normally get to go. And that basketball court was something that I knew had always been off limits, and convinced Disney Plus and Imagineering to let that happen. And then, they asked, well, who would you want to be up there with you? And I said, well, Bob Gurr. Wouldn't it be cool to have Bob Gurr take us into the Matterhorn, So that was something that we didn't scout it out necessarily. We just kind of did it. We scouted it out before Bob got there, but then I just kind of guided Bob and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. And, we're going to follow you in. And And so we did that, and we had the basketball up there, and you know, it was just more of a reflective moment of saying, like, you know, here he was at the beginning of this entire attraction, saw it in its skeletal formation and helped design the track layout. And then now he's just kind of shooting hoops, you know. And when he told me he doesn't really throw hoops and he did it underhand, I was like, I fell in love with Bob Gurr even more.
Yeah.
And then when he got it, I was like, awesome. And then, you know, I noticed that all these signatures were there, and he started talking about that. And I said, well, you know, what you hear when I'm asking him, well, would you like to sign it, or have you ever signed it? And he goes, no. And like, that was just spontaneous.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have thought that was sort of, you know, planned in advance, but that was just, you know, us having a conversation, you know. And but I, as a filmmaker, I really, I don't know, feel like I know when to go somewhere, you know. When I see something that can be an emotional moment, I can sort of say, okay, I see this over here, I got Bob, let's see if we can find a scene that can bring these two together. And you know, and so you know, that was a special thing, and wasn't sure whether it was okay for him to sign the wall, but I just said, let's just do it. I figured no one's gonna fire me for that. So
right. It you know, it's so interesting because he was actually talking about that exact moment and how spontaneity was there, and you were able to get to sign the Matterhorn, and he was able to do that. And it's just really neat to hear it from both perspectives and be able to hear that. And I think that that's the only time in the series that we hear your voice, because you say, do you want to sign it? Is that, I think that that's you that says that.
Yeah.
And,
And then I also mentioned something in episode 6 with Bob Iger, and he's talking about the end of Shanghai Disneyland and how it was the most special day and the opening. And I said, well, where do you go from here? And he said, Disneyland.
Disneyland.
That was one of my favorite moments, because I was like, I would have never. I kind of knew he might say that, but I was like, it was like that typical question. Well, where do you go from here? You know.
Yeah.
Right.
What do you do after you won the Super Bowl? I go to
Super
Disneyland.
Bowl, yeah.
So anyway, I fed him the bait and he took it and he ran away.
That's great. That's great. Brett, you had a question about Imagineering Story as well.
Well, yes, actually, in episode 5 of the Imagineering Story, Angela Bassett's narration says, one thing Disney designers have no control over is external forces. Whether bracing for a natural disaster, riot, or epidemic, they must prepare for the worst. And in that episode, Daniel Ju talked about the 2011 Japan earthquake, and that he said that Tokyo Disneyland had to open for the country to begin to heal. Since we're not having an earthquake, but we're in the middle of a pandemic, and Disney parks around the world are starting to reopen after being closed for a couple of months. What do you think it is about Disney specifically that gives people assurance that things will be okay?
Well, I think it was something that was in the DNA of Disneyland when Walt built Disneyland and had a vision for it, which was, this is a place where families can come together and be together and experience surprises together and adventure and joy and exhilaration and laugh and eat together and play together and sort of be disarmed, you know. Basically just get away from your everyday and go into a world that is completely different and exciting and you know, just playful, really. Like, try to get you to be playful. To every adult, there's a child in every adult, right? And so that's that's the motto, right? So I think when you have these natural disasters that, you know, we're all feeling the weight of every single day, and we're heavy, and we're, you know, you know, I know Marty Sklar didn't necessarily like the idea that you call Disneyland escapism, but you know, a lot of people call it that. They just say, well, we like to go escape from our daily lives. And But as John Hench said, it's really about reassurance, right? So I think this idea that the parks are reassuring to take you away from the realities of life, experience the music and the five senses of Disneyland that Disneyland gives you, really does make a difference in humanity. And I'm often marveled at the idea that they came up with the motto of the happiest Disneyland, the happiest place on earth, right? So, I mean, who would think that would be a branding logo or line? I'm going to create the happiest place on earth. Imagine if that's what you woke up today and said, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create something that's going to be the happiest place on earth. Now that's a tall order.
Yeah.
And to live up to it, 12 parks later, is unbelievable. So I would often marvel walking through each one of these parks at just how proud Walt would be today, and just how in sheer awe he would be at the people that have followed in his footsteps generation after generation, both artists and engineers and designers and producers and writers and artists. It's amazing. It's amazing how well the business has been led by companies, by different CEOs and different leadership. It's had its pitfalls, which we've seen. It's had its low points when you learn the hard way. But the pendulum swings back and forth, and I think this 60-year look at Imagineering allows every business to look at their own story and say where are some of the pitfalls that we can avoid, or the things that we never realized it took to build the happiest place on earth. So I think now with the pandemic, everybody trying to get back to some sort of normalcy. It's special to go to a Disneyland. It's not normal to go to a Disneyland, but it feels like a place that we want to get back to, that feeling of being together, feeling happy again, enjoying life, and experiencing what Disney does so well, which is to create joy and happiness and bring that to audiences.
I think it's important, if you know that Disneyland or the Disney parks are open, it's kind of like a heavy sigh. We'll be okay, so that's what
it really is amazing that all parks had to close at the same time. I mean, that's unprecedented.
Mm-hmm.
I think Disney is one of the hardest hit companies out there.
Yeah.
Yes.
We'll get through it.
Yeah.
And Disney put out a short interview that they did with you, and talking about the 5 major feats of Imagineering. And I was really intrigued that your 5th feat was Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, because that's something that very few people have had the opportunity to experience, because it opened on March 4th and the parks closed, I want to say around the 17th, 18th, I don't know the exact date, but you also mentioned in that interview that there might be a Iwerks, a little bit of a kind of an Easter egg within the attraction. And so wanted you to talk maybe a little bit about that attraction, and if you would spoil the secret for us, or you want us to keep searching for the Easter egg inside the attraction.
Well, there is, I think it's called, you go through, I haven't ridden the ride. So when I was first introduced to it by Kevin Rafferty, who and Charita Carter, who are overseeing creative leads on the show, on the project, they took me through the whole ride as it was getting built, and showed me the technology that was being innovated, and the projection mapping that was on the walls, and so much cool stuff goes into every new attraction. They're always trying to iterate. The ride system itself is different. And they just said, well, we have a little surprise to share with you. And then they said, this is going to be, you're going to go through this one room, and it's going to be it's going to say Iwerks Waterworks.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's like, like a big industrial kind of room with a lot of different factories and things. So
Oh,
I haven't been in it yet, and I look forward
well,
to
we'll
it.
look for that.
Yeah.
Iwerks Waterworks. So it was a sweet little nod, and that's the one thing that Imagineering is so cool about. They really try to, you know, bring in the Imagineers and the backstories to their
Yeah.
their people, their family, their colleagues into the attractions.
Well, you've just made our day, because I know that when all three of us, when we go, when we see it, we're going to say, now Leslie Iwerks told me, it was
Yes,
right.
told us.
The
Yes,
Leslie Iwerks told, so that'll be a lot of fun for us.
yes. Thank you. Oh, see, we're Disney geeks.
Yeah.
Yeah, to the
Big
core.
fans.
Yeah. So.
Oh, you guys are sweet. Thank you.
Yeah. And Vanessa, you wanted to talk. Actually, she referenced her TED Talk earlier, and you had a question about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, great TED Talk. And I really liked how you talked about capturing stories before they are gone forever. And I just wondered, how does it feel to interview people who may be giving you their last on-camera interview? What's that feeling? What's the weight of that as you're interviewing them?
Well, I don't necessarily know that that's going to be their last interview. I'm trying to think of somebody that I knew might be gone before I see him again.
It's more precious. It's every
Yeah.
time that you're talking to someone, especially, well, you just never know. But when you talk to someone and it turns out to be that,
Right.
you're glad that
Yeah.
their story, you were able to capture their story. And because we've had that experience here with some of the people that we've talked to. So anyway,
Well,
I'll
and
let
I mean, that's,
do your answer.
you mentioned talking about the Imagineering story and how long of a process that was to film. I'm so grateful that Marty Sklar was so featured in that because even though he had passed by the time that had come out, it's really, his legacy looms so large over so much of the Disney parks. And so, so those opportunities to make sure that we capture that history, I think, is more of the essence of the question.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, Marty, as an example of somebody who was the reason I did this series. I mean, Marty, it was Marty's idea. When I screened the Pixar story at Imagineering, they invited me over to screen it at WDI in Glendale, the Pixar story. And Marty was there, and afterwards he said, Leslie, when are you going to do the Imagineering story? And I said, wow, Marty, you tell me, I'd love to. So of course, it was kind of that same feeling when John and Ed asked me to do the Pixar story. They're like, would you want to tell our story? And I said, are you kidding? They got Steve Jobs to buy in, and then I was off and running. So same thing with Marty, is like, do you want to tell the Imagineering story? I said yes. So that, as I said, led to a number of years, and I would confer with Marty on and off about the history of the company and turning points, and we worked on an outline together that I still have, and I'd go over to his house and we'd work in his office and just talk through the history. And I'd go back and kind of write up a treatment, and then I'd send it to him, and then he'd say, this is correct and this isn't, here's where you need to really focus, and I would suggest this, and here where you're going to get into some landmines politically, and so he was really helpful with all that. And I know he wanted the real truth to be told, and so his DNA is all through that series, and I thought of Marty so much during the making of it. And then if I had to do one thing over again, I would have interviewed Marty like one or two more times, on camera. I spent a lot of time off camera with him, but then finally when we came down to his interview, we had like 2 hours, and I could have used another 4 hours, 6 hours with him and getting all that. At the same time, you don't always know what you need. So sometimes you over interview and sometimes you under interview, especially when something as long as this. But going back to the TED Talk, it's, the idea is that stories meant to be told. And I always believe that you've got to share stories that are important to be told. And I started that TED Talk out with the old African proverb, when an old man dies, a library burns. And I think Marty knew that this was a story that needed to be told, was meant to be told. And his legacy is in it. And when I learned that he passed away about a year and a half before the series was finished, it just broke my heart, because I really, really wanted Marty to see this come to fruition. But fortunately, I was able to share it with his wife and his daughter, and they were really, touched by the whole series. And then for me, I really wanted to dedicate it to Marty. The whole series was dedicated to Marty at the very end. So that was my kind of nod to Marty, and say, thank you, Marty, for everything you did for this company, for Disney, for the fans, and for me. So
just seems like such an incredible person. I just finished reading Magic Journey, the new Kevin Rafferty book, and he has such deference for Marty Sklar. It's incredible. But as we begin to wrap up here, just more of a philosophical question about documenting history as you do. How do you allow your own personal feelings on a particular subject matter to drive some of the creative process, or do you try to keep your own personal feelings outside of that while you're creating something, especially when you're so close to the history? You've worked on so many projects that, certainly some of these projects are your family history. So how do you handle your own personal feelings and emotions when it comes to that?
Well, it's a big question. It depends on the subject. For Imagineering, I think it was a fine line that I rode between knowing the company as well as I do, as far as sort of having one foot in it growing up and one foot out. Meaning, I'm not an employee of the studio. I haven't worked at the company, as an employee, but I've done films with and for the company. And I feel a real kinship with Disney, and I would love to continue to work with Disney in many capacities, even outside of documentaries. But I also know that when you're telling a story of a subject, whatever that subject is, whether it be the history of a division like Imagineering, at the end of the day, it's all about humanity and people. And people drive these stories, and people have challenges, they have emotions, they have these insecurities, they have these vulnerable moments. And we as human beings, as viewers, can relate to that. And the more I can bring that emotion out and really bring out the conflict that's real, that we can all relate to, the better. And so that's really how we approached the Imagineering Story, which was, start with the turning points, and why were these turning points either good or bad, and what inspired them. And, and it was really, with so many characters, it was very tricky to know who to put the weight on. And it became clear pretty early on that I didn't want to give any one person too much weight. I wanted the 60-year story to evolve, and everybody would be introduced as they were involved in that particular part of that story. And I think we did as best a job as we could in balancing that and giving everybody the proper credit. Now, of course, we're going to leave out a lot of people, but that's just inevitable. And I think when it comes to like my family, for example, a lot of people were like, oh, you should have your family in it more, and your grandfather should have had more weight. But I'm also sensitive to that. I did a film on my grandfather. He and my dad, they're in it, but they're just equal to all the other Imagineers who have done so much. And my dad actually was not an official Imagineer. He was he worked at the machine shops, and he was head of the machine shop. So, but I think for that, I had to kind of ride that fine line. Because at the end of the day, we're all pretty humble. Like, Imagineers are humble people. It's not about ego. You leave your ego at the door. And that's what I love about this group of people. And probably why I feel such a kinship. And, and I think for other films, you do have to have a point of view. You have to either, or you try, it's tricky, because when I was starting out, it was, you've got to have a point of view. And if you don't have a point of view, then, you know, why are you a filmmaker? And then if you have a point of view, I found, then you get stigmatized by the critics for having too much of a point of view, and then they attack you for the opposite. So I think I've written that fine line on different films. But at the end of the day, I take on a subject because I think that it's got multiple angles for people to analyze and for people to take something away from. And so, for example, my recent film called Selling Lies, you know, I went into the lion's den of the main guy who's overseeing fake news in Macedonia and doing the biggest damage. And I had to completely become objective. And I had to reframe my mind and not vilify him and not treat him as this evil guy. And I really had to have empathy and humanity around, you know, him. He's a married guy. He's a nice guy. You would never think he was doing anything that seemed evil, or, you know. And so that's the hard part, when you have to really be just very, you know, straight and narrow and objective. And that's not easy. And I do think that helps you as a filmmaker, because you end up letting the audience make their own decision. So I think those are always the tricky parts. You know, there's moments like in Recycled Life when I'm seeing a little girl whose mother is recycling in the garbage dump, and she's just sitting there, and, you know, she's trying to sleep in the garbage dump while her mother picks trash. And there's vultures hopping around her looking for food while her mother's fighting for the same food. You know, things like that literally will make me cry as I'm sitting there behind a camera lens. But I also, you know that these are things. The reason I'm making a movie is because I'm trying to show something that the world needs to see, or make a difference that people can help once they see it. And there's so many stories in this world that, you know, we know about, but once you see it in a cohesive way in a movie with music and editing, and it's nice and polished, and you see it as a real story, now all of a sudden you're like, oh, I get it. You know, it's just a different experience than what you're reading bits and pieces in news and seeing on the news and stuff like that. So I enjoy that aspect of finding a story that I can actually create and pull all those pieces together and make a real story.
Brett, you had a final question here?
Well, okay. I've got to tell you that, let's see, on November 12th, the absolutely first program that I watched on Disney Plus was the Imagineering Story. So, you know, so, and it was like at 2 something in the morning. I thought it was supposed to download like later in the day, but I'm like going, I'm going to wake up and just see if it's there. Well, it was the first thing I watched. So, but we had to watch them, you know, one at a time. But the thing was, when I was rewatching it this weekend, which was maybe for the 4th time because I'm a fan. Anyway, I noticed that it was in the notation, it was S1, E1 through 6. So that's season 1. Are more seasons a possibility?
That's the $1 million question that everyone asks me.
Yeah,
and,
well, okay. But he said, well, I was saying that with trying to contain my sheer joy and excitement. But
well,
you know,
so. we all would love to, and if and when that news drops, I'll let Disney be the one to drop it. How's that?
Well, sure, yes.
That's so
anyway,
but
thank you,
Vanessa.
Yeah, well, one final question for me. You know, we've been in quarantine, and we've seen a lot of new creativity come from that. So our question is this experience bringing you any new ideas for projects, and what's next for you? And if you say Disneyland, that's okay.
Oh, I will definitely be going to Disneyland when it opens up. But you know, I've been in the throes of writing a lot, and so we've been, you know, we're in negotiations on some new projects, and so there'll be new things coming out, which I'll be able to announce, you know, hopefully soon. Meanwhile, there's a number of narrative projects, I should say, you know, 3 that I have been juggling back and forth and writing. So I'm excited to get to the narrative side of things and start developing series. And so that's been my focus, because I've had the I don't know, just the real, where no one's filming, right? So I'm busy just writing and juggling all these different negotiations, which is always fun.
I do wonder if looking back on all of this, 5-10 years from now, we start to see that there are some creativity that has been going on in this time where people had the moment to be in their home and writing and things, and what that might bring to the world. Obviously, tragedy everywhere from this pandemic, but it's, I guess the optimist in me also wants to think that there's a lot of creativity in the world, and a lot that's being done by those of you that do create such wonderful work for us all to enjoy. I guess I'm putting maybe a lot of stake on you.
Well, yeah, and I have one thing that we did do is we spun up a new series that we're actually in the editing mode now of on a global restaurant story of during COVID. And so it's the hospitality during the most inhospitable times. And so we've had different restaurateurs, Michelin star restaurants, sending us footage of their day in the life trying to get through COVID, and what they're doing to innovate and change as a result of it. And ultimately, there's going to be, there's reports that 85% of restaurants are going to go out of business once this is all back up. And it's a real blow to that industry. And so we are allowing a number of people, inviting a number of, from Shanghai to India to France to Spain, to like 10 cities around the country, are all filming. And I'm doing Skype interviews and with these restaurateurs and these chefs, and it's there's so much humanity and so much heart and soul into feeding people. And when somebody can't do what they love most, and they're curtailed in that way, it's hard, and we're seeing it industry wide in so many different industries, but just with a lens on the hospitality industry, it's been very powerful.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been just a sheer joy for us to be able to talk to you about your entire career, your family, and then also, of course, the Imagineering Story, which is available on Disney Plus. And to our listeners out there, if you have not watched the Imagineering Story, you are in for a treat when you turn that on. So thank you again, Leslie, for all of your time.
Yeah, and I also welcome anybody that's interested in the Iwerks. My dad's got a new book out, the Walt Disney's Ultimate Inventor, The Genius of Iwerks, and it's a book, you can get it on Amazon, and it's just, Disney Publishing did an amazing job with this beautiful copy.
Oh, wow.
So,
oh boy. Okay, well, I'm going to get on Amazon now. So thank you so much. Wow.
I would say you probably just sold at least 3 copies of that book in the next 10 minutes or so.
Yes.
So thank you again.
A lot of Disney fans out there, so it's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
How wonderful was that? Just absolutely incredible. It was great to talk to her about her philosophy in filmmaking and how she sees her role as documenting all of this history that's going on around us. We got to talk a little bit about current events, but also a lot of her work throughout her storied career and where she's going. I can't wait to see the next project that Leslie works on. But Vanessa, some thoughts about the interview?
Oh, it was just wonderful. Leslie is so intelligent. You can tell that when she's looking into these stories, there's nuance, there's details, there's context that really frames everything, and she's able to take that all in. And what a creative mind. It was a real pleasure to be able to speak with her.
Absolutely. Brett?
Wow. Again, I just say, wow. I've been an admirer of her work from the Pixar Story, and now I've had the opportunity to watch more of her work, and it is a very varied resume, and her work is it is wonderful. So I highly recommend checking out everything that's on iTunes or on YouTube. But yeah, talking with Leslie Iwerks is something that I never thought I would be able to do, and now we have. And my life is so much richer for talking to her today, for watching her work, and just can't say enough of what a wonderful experience it was. How about that?
Yeah, and I think if you are coming at her work from a Disney fan, because of course she's done the documentary about her grandfather, she's done the Pixar story, she's done Imagineering Story, but also check out her other work. And there's a lot of variety in what she has covered and what she has put to film, and it's all truly magnificent. So check it out, and we can't recommend that enough. We have had such a wonderful string of guests here on the podcast, from talking to Kevin Lima and Floyd Norman, Bob Gurr, and now Leslie Iwerks. We will continue to bring some of those interviews to you as we are able to get those interviews and to record those for you. But we will be going back to a bit of a normal schedule in terms of our release dates and where we're going to go from here for the podcast. And we actually recorded, this is a bit of a behind the podcast, about a month ago, we recorded an episode on Enchanted. And that hasn't been released yet because we've had so many fantastic guests to bring you, but we will be releasing that very soon. So we recommend that you follow along with us on NPR Illinois. And then also you can find Beyond the Mouse podcast anywhere that you can get a podcast. We are also part of the Front Row Network. You can find them on social media and on podcasts. Just search the Front Row Network and you'll find them there. Thank you if you've been a loyal listener from the beginning. And also thank you if you are just now coming to us from a lot of these interviews that we've been doing. We really appreciate you listening and hope you continue to listen for us. And also make sure to subscribe and then give us a rating on iTunes or whatever podcast app you're using, because that just increases our visibility and allows more listeners to come on and listen to us as well. So thank you all so much. It's been such a treat. Thank you again to Leslie for allowing some time out of your day to be able to talk to us. I still just on cloud nine. So I guess that's it for me. From Beyond the Mouse, I am Craig.
I'm Vanessa.
And I'm Brett.
And we will see you real soon in the front row. Maybe of Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway.
Oh my
looking
gosh.
for that?
Yeah, that's going to be fun.
I got eyes for it.